everybody. Welcome to Pax Americana. Sorry, we're a few minutes late. Technical difficulties. Good to see you, Olga.
You too. How are you? Another
Great,
week.
thanks. Another week. And I am so grateful to everybody who showed up yesterday to our subscriber town hall, which was fantastic. To all of you who were there, thank you so much for showing up. We did not know how many people we were going to get, and we got an inordinately tremendous amount. So we're very grateful. We are going to do this every couple weeks. And I think that we're not going to do it 2 weeks from yesterday because I will be away that week, but we are going to do it the week after, the week of the 15th. We'll figure out a date and time that works for everybody. But thank you to everybody who joined, people who did not join. We would love to have you join us. If you are a paid subscriber to either of our Substacks, please join us for one of these town halls because it was just so wonderful to actually interact with people and have them ask questions and to meet so many of you. We feel like sometimes we write into a void or talk into a void, and we know people read and we know people hear us, but it's always so nice to put faces and names to people who comment. So thank you to everybody who joined us yesterday.
Yeah, I have to say, here, I love Substack Live, but it's
Yeah.
like, I see you, you see me,
Yeah.
and it's like we're talking at people, and it was so nice to interact and actually hear what's happening across the country, and just to get people's personal, stories and like what's happening in in their part, and I loved it. I loved that,
Yeah.
interactive part. So we will continue doing this.
Yes, and thank you. And to people who asked if we would post the interaction from yesterday, we didn't ask people if they minded being recorded. And so as a result of that, we did not record because some people may not be comfortable with that. So unfortunately, we can't post it. But maybe next time we will ask if people are interested in, if they're okay with being recorded, and we'll post that one. I just don't want to violate anybody's privacy by doing that.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, let's get to a couple of things. I have a couple of programming notes that I want to just briefly mention. I am interviewing Ken Harbaugh today at 3 p.m. Eastern. And the reason I'm bringing this up on this show is Ken is currently in Ukraine. And he has been in Ukraine for a few days now. And I don't know whether he arrived before or after the massive shelling and the massive rocket attacks that have been going on in Ukraine, but I think he was there
He
for
was
it.
in
So
transit. He
yeah,
left Friday and he was
yeah,
on his way
yeah,
as this was happening.
right, but he's certainly there now,
Yeah.
and certainly has insight as to what is going on, both in Kiev and other places where they are um, going. I don't know exactly where they're going, but knowing who he's with and knowing his background, I don't think they're just cooling their heels in the capital city. I think they'll probably be elsewhere as well. So I'm talking to him about all of that at 3 o'clock today on Substack Live. I really hope people can join us if they can. Um, Olga, there was a very interesting, and I sent this to you this morning, a very interesting reel, I guess, or video that somebody from the BBC did about what's happening in Russia today. And it's short, and we will post it after we are, when we send this out to people, we'll link to it. But what I thought was interesting about it was that there is a huge resurrection in Russia of Joseph Stalin that has been going on for a decade now, I would say, if not longer, not as the genocidal tyrant that he was. And I hate making Hitler analogies, but I will actually say that he is probably the only person, or one of the very few people in history that could be compared to Hitler, and in some ways actually exceeded Hitler in the number of people that he murdered, his own people for sure. That is being resurrected. There is a metro station in Moscow that now has a bas relief statue of Stalin in the metro station. What Simon did not put into his report, but which I know, is that that metro station connects to the rail line that goes to and from the airport. So if you are arriving in Moscow and you are taking the train, as many people do, from the airport to into the city center, you get off at that rail station and then you take the metro line to wherever you're going. And when you do take that metro line, you will see a statue of Joseph Stalin. So it is not a coincidence to me that that's where they put it. And the other thing that he talked about is that there's a, a government official who said that the dissolution of the Soviet Union was not legal, and that therefore everything that's happening in Ukraine now is kind of like just a dispute between people in the same country, and nothing to see here. I raise this all because it is something that I think you and I have predicted and talked about for a very long time, but is now becoming much more apparent, which is that, of course, they do want to resurrect the Soviet Union. And if I were any of the other 13 former Soviet republics that are not Russia and Ukraine, I would be terrified right now because none of these countries want to be part of Russia and part of a new Soviet Union, but it has been made clear that they will be, whether they like it or not. And the other thing that I think is important to note here is that the whitewashing of history, the genocide for which the Stalin regime was known, not just in Russia, but throughout the Soviet Union, including Ukraine. He was responsible for what is called the Holodomor, which is the starvation purposely of the Ukrainians. I mean, millions upon millions upon millions of Ukrainians died because he purposely starved them to death
Mhm.
to punish them. They were called kulaks, and he punished them for even remotely hoarding a little bit of food for themselves. And of course, Putin is engaged in exactly the same kind of behavior, not maybe to that scale, but trending in that direction. And so, of course, Stalin has to be resurrected so that all of Putin's crimes are also accepted by the people. What do you make of all this, Olga? Because I just, I watched this video and I had two reactions. One was, oh, Moscow's such a beautiful city. 'Cause, and when as somebody who was born there, I'm thinking, God, I wish I'm banned from going there, but what a beautiful city. I wish I could take my son there to show him where his mother's from. And the other reaction I had was just horror and just disgust and devastation at the country from which I come. Um, just completely. Once in a while, I just remember that I came from there. My family can trace its roots back, for I don't know how many generations, as can yours, and just disgusted with, I guess, who people who are my people. I don't think of them as my people, but just disgusted. What do you make of all this?
So honestly, I'm not surprised at all. I
Yeah,
have been watching, Russia and working on Russia since, forever. I mean,
yeah,
it's something that I've done forever. And, after the collapse, it was interesting because, at that point I was in high school here. Or going, yeah, no, I was in high school.
yeah,
And I remember, how the West was taking victory laps, and I was, in a predominantly Russian neighborhood. And I mean, the anger and just the humiliation and just, people living here in US, I mean, how they talked about Americans. I was like, the
mm,
West is making a big mistake. There is no victory lap. And then when you would read, even though you had Yeltsin who came in, the country basically was, I mean, we all remember Moscow of the 90s, people were being assassinated, car bombs and whatnot. But then when Putin came in, basically the same Cheka system that has existed forever he started putting back into place. I
mm,
mean, there was temporary chaos. The hardliners, interestingly enough, after the collapse, the hardliners blamed the West, not themselves, not their internal politics, not anything that they
yeah,
did wrong. They blamed the West, and they vowed revenge for the West. I mean, they were very, very, very adamant that once, they get themselves together, that the West will pay for the collapse of the Soviet Union. And so it went on even under Yeltsin, we remember the Chechnya War, that that the Russians had to kind of mark their place. And under Putin, it started escalating. And frankly, I mean, now the West is paying attention, since the full-scale invasion and maybe since 2016 when Russia attacked US elections. But this has been happening. And, over the past 2 decades, I mean, if you watch Russian TV, you will see, you see all of this. Everything that came out in that report today, you see all of it. And we saw, I mean, they've never accepted the separation and independence of countries that were held hostage under the Soviet Union. They never accepted it. To them, okay, they were there, but they didn't accept it. Um, just in if you, like I said, watch TV, read Russian opinion pieces, you see the sentiment has always existed. And now, over the past decade, it has been escalating. You had the Georgia invasion over a decade in 2008. You had Russia attacking Estonia in 2007, with their hybrid warfare, testing it. With cyber attacks and inciting the Russian population in Estonia to come out and protest and try to destabilize the Estonian government. Then from there on, you had Ukraine. And what's interesting, I mean, even over the past several years, Putin has brought back, not only are they normalizing Stalin, not only are they rewriting history, I mean, they literally rewrote the history books of what happened. But you see Putin bringing, like, and was writing about this several years ago. Like in 2017, 18, when I started picking up on these cases and they were increasing, that Putin brought back Brezhnev's practice, which is, now under us, of if anyone speaks against the state, they surely are insane. And they started putting people into mental institutions. And
And
this
and and and,
became,
and just to interrupt you, as awful as mental institutions are in this country, they are subhuman in Russia. I mean, they will dope you up with medicine to make you, if you didn't go in there insane, you will be insane within a week after I mean, they purposely inject you with stuff to make you mentally ill. So, and then they can say, look at this person. Of course, he's mentally ill or she's
yeah,
mentally ill. They didn't go in there that way, but that's what they do with that's what they did with dissidents in the Soviet days, and that's what they're doing with dissidents now. And these people are dissidents, just to be clear. That is what they are.
yeah. And I mean, these practices, these cruel Soviet practices, have been creeping and escalating. And also with the same thing, we talk about, and I've been sounding the alarm here about the surveillance system being built. In Russia, you had this, like, here. They are basically within the federal government, creating an informant system. This is such a common practice. It never went away. Where you inform on your neighbors, your family members.
Yeah.
Literally, I don't think there's one family where someone, if the KGB archives are opened, where someone didn't betray someone or report on someone. And I remember in 2015, I believe 2015, they opened the KGB archives in Ukraine. It was the most painful thing how you saw your family members, your children, your co-workers that were informants within the state and reporting, oh, this person had an original thought, so surely they're a threat to the state. So this practice has been going on, and as far as with Putin, everybody focuses on the greatest geopolitical, that he called the collapse of the Soviet Union, the greatest geopolitical, thing that ever happened. This is how they feel. This is how they've always felt. And you had Putin who, served in Dresden. Um, saw basically protesters marching at him, was had to deal with that, then went back to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapsed. And for them, this is a sentiment that they think that the Soviet Union wrongly collapsed and that all the territories and more belong to Russia. And the most interesting part, I mean, you've seen signs of this. I remember in 2017 or 16, that one of the Russian Duma members said, "Oh, we need to find Russian Empire and and Soviet property abroad because this is ours."
Yeah.
And they actually put a
Yeah.
bill that they need to go and locate. So if you're somewhere, there's a house somewhere, in, I don't know, Lithuania. They're gonna walk, like, their plan mentally was, and on paper was, okay, we're gonna walk in and say this belonged to the Russian Empire in 1800 something. Therefore, this is our property. I mean,
And
frankly, it's laughable, but this is the mentality. It just
yeah,
shows you.
and just to underscore what Stalin did, and this was a brilliant thing to do, and it has absolutely um it has absolutely enforced this for Putin, which is that he would take native Russians and he would resettle them for to into places like Kazakhstan, into places like Georgia. He himself was Georgian. He himself was not an ethnic Russian, which is ironic. Into the Baltics, into Ukraine, and seed those countries with native Russians. So that kind of in a Sudetenland mentality, although he did this in the 30s before the Sudetenland issue came up in the 1938. But um, it was a way to Russify all of these other places so that today there are, in fact, ethnic Russians living in places like Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia for generations. They probably consider themselves Lithuanian, but I don't know what they consider themselves. But certainly, maybe not. But Kazakhstan, I think like 50% of Kazakhstan, I might be wrong in that number, was ethnically Russian. Um, and certainly Ukraine has a huge ethnic Russian population. And that is now their excuse as to why they need to go into these countries, right? It is A, to liberate their fellow ethnic Russians, and B, it is to say that, look, these countries aren't anything but Russian. Of course. I mean, Kazakhstan is a great example. Look, if I'm right about this number, but I think it is somewhere like 50%. Look, 50% of this country is Russian. I mean, how is this not part of Russia? Uh, and that's what they did with Georgia. If you remember in 2008 when they went into Georgia and tried to get that breakaway part of Georgia, which they succeeded in doing because there were ethnic Russians living there. Now, are these ethnic Russians who are oppressed by the Kazakhs or by the Lithuanians or the Latvians? I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough to know if there's, racism's not the right word, but if there's any kind of um,
Now there is,
there
but
is now,
frankly,
right? Yeah.
Uh,
But
now after 2022 there is, but prior to that, I mean, everybody, look, the countries that were held hostage, because I hate saying former Soviet Union,
right.
that were held hostage under Russia, as soon as the collapse, they just wanted their independence. And for the most part, they have been striving to, one, root out any corruption, two, build a strong democratic system, be innovative. They've been focusing on positive, and then you have Russia always pulling them back. And as far as Stalin, I mean, this is one of the biggest mass murderers in history. I mean, he killed millions. Like you said, in Russia, he committed genocide. In Ukraine, and you mentioned with Putin resettling, you know, when Putin took Crimea illegally,
Mm.
and this is a war crime, they bust in Russians. And they have been doing this in all illegally occupied territory, busing in Russians to change the, I guess, what is it, demographic, to say, yes, this is Russian territory. No, it's not. These
Yeah.
people were bussed in. And
Yeah.
this is actually a war crime because you cannot displace people and replace them with your people. And this is what, he has been using Stalin's tactics. And Putin, as I always say, Putin is not, the system. He's a symptom of the system. And this is what a lot of people, in the West don't understand. because they like to have everything so like in a perfect package with a bow on top. This is Putin's war. This is, once Putin falls, everything's going to go back. There's going to be democracy in Russia. No, there's not.
Yeah.
And no, this is not Putin's war. This is something. I mean, I honestly don't know one leader over the past century and a half, maybe Gorbachev, who didn't commit atrocities
Well,
against their people.
Gorbachev did atrocities. Well, not against his people, but
In yeah, in
but certainly in
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan. Certainly
In
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan. And that's what primarily led to the downfall. And then,
Yeah.
they took this and blamed the West. So none of this is surprising. What is surprising is that the West hadn't picked up on this and that they think that NATO is the problem, or, that like they repeat Russia's justifications without understanding and analyzing what is happening, and that Russia doesn't intend to stop. Even if Putin falls, say tomorrow Putin is assassinated, yes, we're going to have a year, 2 years. We can honestly buy ourselves probably 3 years of time to get our shit together, to fight off Russian aggression. But the first year they'll be occupied shooting each other to get a leader in place, and then all the families will be fighting for state resources and who has control of what. But they will immediately again restart with their operations abroad, and this is what people don't understand, because Putin was placed in, by frankly the KGB. There were three options to put who to put into place, and he was the one who basically they wedged him in. But the system is the same, and until the system changes, which it hasn't, nothing will change, and we will see this rewriting of history. We will see what is happening in schools, and this again for 2 decades they have, focused on the youth and indoctrinating people, and literally, and I hate to say this, but I mean they are literally breeding the next generation of terrorists. You
Well,
have children putting together and learning how to put together, grenades. And I mean, this is in the Soviet days, this was practiced. You went to school and, uh, had to take apart Kalashnikovs, but this is what's happening now.
I want to just mention two things. One is Keith Collins. You mentioned in your comment about Georgia. You're absolutely right, and shame on us for not remembering that. Of course, on April 9th, it was called the massacre of Tbilisi in Georgia. But when the Georgians rebelled in 1989 against the Soviet Union, Gorbachev sent in the Soviet army and gassed them and killed um, 21 people, and hundreds of people were injured. So you're absolutely right that this should be remembered and commemorated, and the Georgians do. So our apology
Yeah, I'm sorry
yeah
about that. It's
for
just that,
neglecting that. And it wasn't the only time.
yeah, absolutely.
Other Soviet republics obviously felt compelled to rebel, and they were also put down. And that was by Gorbachev, who I thought, interestingly, the most hated man in Russia and venerated in the West. And the truth is very much somewhere in between. So that's one. The other thing that I want to say is that we would be remiss if we didn't draw parallels between what Olga's talking about in Russia right now and what is happening here in the United States. People may not know this. It's been not at all reported in the way that it should be, but Oklahoma has passed a law where you are now taught in schools that the 2020 election was stolen.
Yep,
And that is now part of the Oklahoma public school curriculum. So, talking about breeding the next generation
yep,
of people, that's what is going on here. That's one. Two, when you're talking about what is happening with respect to putting everything down and with respect to what they're doing with their people, I would also be remiss. I actually wrote a newsletter and Substack newsletter about this today, which I hit publish on 5 seconds before we went live on air. So for those of you who haven't had a chance to read it, I'll give you a preview and you could read it later.
I'll
But
put it in the show
yeah,
notes.
thank you. But just be aware that Elon Musk has been doing this public relations tour in the last week talking about how he is no longer going to be involved in government. He's going to go back to Tesla and SpaceX. And I'm in the crisis management business in my day job, and I know I can spot a well placed crisis manager operation from a mile away. This is a public relations coup that ironically he has hired Katie Miller, who is Stephen Miller's wife, full time at Tesla, and she's setting this up for him, reportedly. What is fascinating about this is that the media is giving him the space to talk about this and how he is now his own guy. And in fact, to save himself and his brand, he's even criticizing Trump for the quote unquote big, beautiful bill. And there's a wedge between them. And I think this is because he understands that the people who used to buy Teslas are not necessarily MAGA people. And the MAGA people who he thought were going to be his new consumers are not. So Tesla stock has tanked precipitously since January 20th as a result of all of his behavior. And the people who used to buy Teslas now are turning them in early and just want nothing to do with him. SpaceX rockets keep exploding. The brand has tanked precipitously as much as the rockets have tanked. So his personal brand. So he's doing all of these interviews. In fact, he's also sitting down on Sunday with CBS Sunday Morning to talk about how he is this warm and fuzzy guy, and let me tell you, I've done CBS Sunday Morning. It's a wonderful show. I love it, but it is not 60 minutes for a reason, right? Because they don't want you consuming really, really, really devastating news with your cereal on a Sunday morning. So this is kind of the warm and fuzzy show that you want to do, and that's what he's doing. He's done interviews with the Wall Street Journal. He's done interviews with Washington Post, and they're all falling for it in the sense that they're all giving him the space to talk about it.
Ah,
What they are not talking about, and I want people to listen to me very carefully, because if you care about what's happening in Russia, you should also care about what's happening in your own country that is very similar if you are American. If you're not American, be in horror at what is happening to our country. Yesterday, a judge, and I don't know that anybody's seen this, unfortunately, because this stuff is not reported. Elon Musk's lamentations over Tesla's being burned and how poor Elon Musk is being mistreated and misunderstood is being reported at length. What is not being reported is that yesterday a federal judge ruled
yeah.
that Doge, which remember is Elon Musk is still involved in by his own admission, he's not totally walking away. Doge is seated with all of his people who worked for him at Tesla or SpaceX or at his AI company, but these are all Doge is run by his people, not run by government employees, can access sensitive financial information on millions of Americans of the Treasury Department.
Yep.
This is now allowed. They now have access to your tax records, which only a few people used to be able to access. But now all of us, all of our tax records are in the hands of Elon Musk's 20-year-old minions. Understand that was
Big
now
balls.
Big Balls, a guy named Big Balls, who I think is 19 years old, has access to your tax data and my tax data. And not just that, they have access to our what's happening at HSS,
Yep.
to potentially your medical information. They have access to your social security numbers. And what is also not reported is that Doge is using Musk's artificial intelligence
Yep.
chatbot, Grok, to analyze government data.
Mhm.
So all of that information that you assume was protected is now in the hands of an unstable, avaricious billionaire. I say all of this to say that this is the big brother state that the Soviets perfected, that is happening in Russia today, that is now happening here in the United States. And to scare you further, and I don't mean to frighten people, but it is a frightening situation. Musk kind of gave the game away when he talked about, and I'm going to read you the quote from the Washington Post because it's important to read the whole quote. This is the quote. He said he plans to focus Doge's efforts on improving the federal bureaucracy's computer system, a less controversial goal than taking a chainsaw to the workforce. And here's the quote from Musk on that. There's like so many situations where the computers are broken, even in the intelligence world, where in order to transfer data from one computer to another, you have to print it out and then type it into the next computer. And this is just literally a thing that was brought to my attention. So, this man who has your personal information and who has security clearance as a result of his work at SpaceX, not used to be not top security clearance information under Biden, but I'm sure it is now under Trump, does not understand why the intelligence community has made it difficult to transfer intelligence information from one computer to the next and why you have to print it out and manually input it into the next computer. It is because that information is so sensitive that they don't want somebody hitting send on it easily.
And
But
it being
Elon Musk
intercepted.
and being intercepted. Elon Musk does not understand that. In the same way, he doesn't understand why it's not a problem, ostensibly, to hit send on your personal tax information from one guy to the next in Doge. Why it shouldn't be easy to take that information and put it into Grok, his private for profit AI search engine, which can then spit out anything about you. Anything about you. Oh, Jane Smith? Oh, here's your social security. You want to type in Jane Smith into Grok? Oh, okay. I'm going to tell you that Jane Smith had an abortion when she was 19. I'm going to tell you that Jane Smith now has cancer. You may not want her employer to know that because she doesn't want that to sideline her job, but she has cancer. We know that because we accessed her personal medical information. Oh, here's her social security number. Also, Jane Smith earned $50,000 last year or $100,000 last year. And here's her personal tax information. And here's where she derived that income. All of that is what is happening right now. All of that is the same big brother stuff that happened in the Soviet Union and in Russia, except they don't have the technology that we do in this country to be able to effectuate it so easily. But Elon Musk does.
I'm like shaking my head nonstop because this is exactly what is happening. I wrote an article um about a month and a half ago on this, documenting all the patterns, and basically he has built a surveillance system, a centralized surveillance system that can fuse our data from all agencies. Even more scary is that the surveillance system will be able to process basically and create target lists using AI. And it's interesting in the article I had written, like, Europe has very, very strict digital
Yeah.
laws. And the reason that they do, which maybe some might not, fully understand, is because they never want to allow what happened with Hitler, for one person to have so much information from so many different, agencies, to fuse this information together and then to create target lists against the Jews, the Roma,
Yeah.
the, LGBTQ and whatnot. And this is exactly, I wrote this, that he was building a surveillance state. And then from there, once they build this surveillance state, they can basically, run an AI thing and say, give us a list of all the more problematic people. Obviously, you and I would be on the list, and then we would be like the higher targets to try to silence before we cause problems.
Yeah.
Even worse, there are government agencies now working with particularly ICE. And it's, I keep saying immigrants and international students are the test case for what's coming to us. They're working with a company called Flock, and Flock can, without a contract, by the way. This is under the books, no contract, no records, nothing. They are working with this company and local law enforcement who are not reporting this, or, showing that this partnership or exists, that it's just being done as favors. And Flock had the license reader, a nation statewide license reader. So basically, not only can they fuse all this information, then they can find you wherever you are. So if you're traveling from New York to, Washington, D.C., they could track you as you're moving. Um, And this is extremely scary because this, I mean, the signs from my tracker that I saw, and I wrote, started it off like Doge's cover. And I didn't understand when they announced it what it was cover for. And as I was documenting all these things, I was like, wow, this is not, this is a centralized surveillance system. So they can basically put everything together and then target us, know our pressure points, know who to threaten, know who, have a complete dossier on each of us through AI, knowing like, oh, this person, changes jobs frequently, so they're more unstable. Whereas this person, really stayed in their job and they really loved this job for so long. Um, you know, uh, and from there, if there's something you find on the person, then you can go and say, listen, we're going to report this to your job. So, I mean, the whole thing is extremely scary. I don't understand where Congress is. I don't understand where the media is. And this, I mean, I don't know much about China, but I know about Russia's surveillance system. And this is identical, including, like I said, the tactics of having informants. I mean, they literally, this unauthorized fake agency set up informants across every single agency where they have now an anti-Christian bias task force and their hotline to report your fellow workers who maybe made an anti-Christian, or they assume, I guess, that they are not a Christian and don't support Christianity. And they have, snitch hotlines on if someone is not being loyal to Trump or if someone's actually doing their job. And I mean, this is something I don't understand how something like this is not being like over the past a few months, like screamed on every single TV and spoken by every single Democrat, every journalist, because this is the biggest threat out of everything happening. This is it.
Well, I'll tell you this about China, which I don't know much about either compared to Russia, but I will tell you that I do know that Elon Musk has a major factory in
Yep.
Shanghai and that he's incredibly close to
Yep.
the Chinese Communist Party, which has allowed him to operate in China. And that if that Shanghai factory were to shut down, Elon Musk's Tesla business would just
Yep.
collapse for the most part. So, if you are wondering what Elon Musk is doing with our information, understand that he's also a major national security risk because of his close
Yeah.
relationship to the Chinese. And in addition to that, he apparently has a standing phone conversation with Putin himself quite often. And we don't know what's discussed, but it's fascinating that he apparently has a direct line to the Russian president. Not really sure what Putin's doing with him either. All I know is that he has our personal information, and God knows who else he's giving that to. So I want to just move on
And
to
I
the
just
next
want to
question.
add one more thing before we
Yeah.
move on. A lot of people, another thing that went under the radar, that they rewired their communications in the White House using Starlink.
Yep.
This communications are moving through like an center location, off-site location. This is another thing. And the last thing to wrap up on Elon Musk, I actually wanted to write about this today, that the media is sitting and distancing himself and playing this PR game with him. But I equate him to like a, SVR general, which is Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. If they have 30 spies and say they come in US and place their spies, get them acclimated to carry out their things, just because this SVR general goes back home doesn't mean the spies aren't here on
Mhm.
US soil running around. And this his every single agency is infiltrated with these cyber criminals, hackers, and first of all, not unvetted operatives. We don't know who they are. We know a handful of them. And the handful that we do know, I mean, it's extremely troubling the data we got, but they're still there. So he does not have to physically be in Washington,
No.
D.C., because they embedded his operatives and Palantir's operatives jointly. So as long as they are there, they can do whatever they want and then send him off a report. Now, what did you do the 5 things this week?
Yeah. I mean, it's absurd. So I want to go around the I want to go around the world here very quickly and talk about what's happening in Europe. Christy Nome, who last I checked was running the Department of Homeland Security, which means that she should be focused on what's happening here in the homeland, and focused on snatching women, children, and others off the streets and shipping them off to foreign
American
gulag,
citizens.
American citizens, shipping them off to foreign gulags. But apparently, in
I
an
took a
effort to
break from that.
in an effort to further stick it to Marco Rubio, who last we checked was processing visas for college students, because he's certainly not working on Middle Eastern peace or peace in Ukraine. That's being done by Steve Witkoff. He's certainly not going to international conferences or meeting with Bibi Netanyahu. Christy Noem's been doing that. She went to Israel recently to deliver a message to Netanyahu not to mess around with the Iranians while Trump is trying to negotiate a nuclear deal with them, which is hilarious because I'm old enough to remember when Trump was trashing Barack Obama for negotiating a nuclear deal with the Iranians, but that's neither here nor there. I don't know who Christine Nome is to deliver messages to other heads of state. I mean, that's typically done by the Secretary of State, but nevertheless, she has been on a foreign tour and she went from the Middle East and now ended up in Poland and at a CPAC conference, which again, CPAC is a Russian infiltrated organization run by an incredibly compromised man who has been repeatedly accused of sexual assault by other men and whose entire financial well-being and the well-being of his family is derived from this Russian infiltrated organization that is just a disgrace. But they're having a conference in Warsaw because, of course, they're having a conference in Warsaw. Why would they have it in the United States? They used to have these conferences all the time in Hungary because they wanted
Yeah.
to learn from Viktor Orban. I mean, it's insane that American conservatives are having these conferences in places that are, um, well, first not in the United States, but nevertheless, she endorsed a far right Polish candidate in the election named Karol Nawricki. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I might be wrong. Um,
Overall.
yeah, Naroki. And she slammed his opponent as a train wreck. And then, for good measure, of course, she attacked Joe Biden over immigration and terrorism because that's why not?
Why
That's what
not?
they do. So, Olga, talk about this because you're the one who brought this to my attention. But it is stunning that an American official, who, by the way, is not tasked with this kind of foreign policy, is first of all hanging out at CPAC. Second, is endorsing far right candidates. I mean, who the hell is she to endorse anybody? By the way, don't necessarily think that helps this guy. It probably hurts him in Poland. The Poles are not particularly pleased with Trump enabler, Putin enablers like Donald Trump and his administration these days. But what do you make of all this?
um, First of all, this is unprecedented, and we really are acting like Russia. Because Russia is the one who walks around and interferes in foreign elections. I mean, this is something, as we breathe, that's how natural it comes to them, and they're always, running operations and doing everything they can to prop up far right candidates, and in some cases, far left candidates. I mean, they have their own set of operations, calculations, and, and each country they've done not only have people embedded, but have done extensive study to run, very sophisticated operations to interfere in domestic politics. But with this is unprecedented because I don't recall any time, unless we're dealing in with an authoritarian country where there's a dictator with an opposition, figure who is trying to make their way for elections for the U.S. to interfere. And we have seen this happening since Trump came into office, and even prior with Elon Musk and his megaphone, that they are doing everything to destabilize European politics. I've written several articles on Musk, everything Musk has been doing in Germany and Britain and across all of Europe. And here to have a US official, you know, publicly going and again supporting a far right candidate. I mean, it's something, it's an embarrassment to the US, it's a humiliation. But But there's always a silver lining. And I just literally wrote it and I'll include it in the show notes. What was it, the week before we had Romanian elections. Last weekend, I don't know, these weekends merge, but we just had Romanian elections. There was a far right candidate that the whole mega crowd supported. And interestingly, because Trump is so vocal and throwing his support, I like literally started seeing a pattern that, and joke that he's the antidote to Russia's operations. So Russia has spent decades and decades of, running operations in Canada, Romania, Moldova, I mean, Albania, you name it, they're there. And here Trump comes along, and the pro-Trump candidate in Romania lost. And he was a Russian-backed candidate. I mean, the Russians, I can't even begin to tell you how furious they were when he lost and the centrist liberal candidate won. And same thing that the election was stolen and pushing the same thing and the mega crowd. I mean, it was a fascinating watch to see mega and Russia working together to delegitimize the results of the election. But he lost. In Albania, there was an election recently, and you know, Rama, who is what was the incumbent, he won. His opponent hired Trump's campaign manager, Chris LaSavita, to try to win. And again, use these mega tactics, defeated. Canada, we were so sure that the far right, I mean, I can't tell you the amount of operations Russia has focused on destabilizing Canada. We were so sure the far right candidate was going to win. And then Trump comes and opens his mouth and he
Yeah.
lost, and he lost his seat. Australia, I mean, you name it, you are beginning to see, at least at this juncture, a shift from the far right support, and it's kind of shifting towards that centrist left support across Europe.
Yep.
So, you know, as I say, we'll see the runoff, the second round to the Polish elections is this weekend, June 1st, will be a nail biter. Hopefully, the centrist liberal will win. But it'll be interesting to see because it's like, everything that Mega touches is like going to shit.
Listen,
So
if you're Polish and you're even remotely thinking about voting for a far right candidate, understand what you're voting for. I mean, you're voting to turn your country over to Vladimir Putin. And as much as they say that's not going to happen, as much as they promise you that that's not going to be the case, the minute this candidate was endorsed by somebody from the Trump administration means that this candidate will listen to the United States, and the United States right now listens to Vladimir Putin. And don't buy the bullshit of Trump pretending that he's had a falling out with
yeah,
Putin. Follow what he does, not what he says. He's saying this because Putin embarrassed him and humiliated him, and even Trump understands that he did. But he's not doing anything about it other than talking a good game because he can't. For whatever reasons, we don't know. We have our suspicions, but we don't know. But he's never, ever, ever stood up to Putin. So if you're in Poland or you know people in Poland who can vote and you're hearing this podcast, I am telling you right now, the moment that Christy Nome endorsed this candidate is the moment you have to understand this candidate has become a transitive property subsidiary of Russia. So vote accordingly. Okay, moving on. It is not a surprise to me because we've constantly covered how much young men, this loneliness epidemic, and young men feel misunderstood, and a lot of them, I hate using the word incel because it's a kind of a pejorative, and I think there's a way to get to these young men without making fun of them for being voluntarily celibate. But a lot of them are uh, in pain. They feel alone. They feel like they can't talk to women. They feel like they're misunderstood, and they grow more angry. And then they find MAGA, or they find Joe Rogan, or they find Theo Vaughn, or whoever they find online. and they become radicalized. Well, there's a new way that they're becoming radicalized, Olga, and that is that they're joining the Russian Orthodox Church for, and I quote, absurd manliness. Um, and you talked about this in your tracker, but a growing number of young American men are converting to Russian Orthodoxy. There's nothing wrong with converting to Russian Orthodoxy in and of itself, if it speaks to you from a religious perspective, but it seems like that's not why they're doing it. They're doing it because they're being drawn to it because it's got very strong and rigid gender roles, right? Men and women not treated equally in that church. Um, don't really have a modern ethos, as you put it, and talk about traditional masculinity. Now, the Russian church, Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, which is the church that they're joining, I want to just say two things. One is this has always been the case of the Russian Orthodox Church. It never evolved, and it never evolved because in the years that it should have been evolving, in the same way that the Catholic Church was having a Vatican II evolution in the 60s, there was no Russian Orthodox Church in the Soviet Union because religion was banned. So it was kind of below ground and not particularly evolving. So as a result, when it came back in exactly the way that it was left in 1917, 1918, which is not particularly modern. And then very quickly thereafter, Putin came into power and seized control of it and became very close to the church and became intertwined with the church. And of course, for him, the whole toxic masculinity thing is a feature, not a bug of his rule. So it's not that I think the church is doing this to try to appeal to American young men.
Mhm.
It's always been this way, but it is a massive added bonus that they are now exporting this to young American men. And I just want to hear your thoughts about this.
So, for me, and I've written extensively over the years, the Russian Orthodox Church, unfortunately, is a arm of Russian intelligence. I
Right,
mean, this is what it is.
right.
I'll just correct one little thing. Stalin did bring back he was an atheist, but he brought back the Orthodox Church, and actually put senior KGB officials to run it,
But it was not,
because,
but it was not
yeah,
something
no,
that people were
it
encouraged to
wasn't,
join.
yeah, it was more, they brought it back to use it as an operation. And this
Right.
goes back to the Tsars, because the Tsars, infiltrated the Orthodox Church, and I mean, literally, it was a grounds for spying and informants to see who might have any negative thing to say about the state or the Tsar. Um, every patriarch was a KGB agent. So you had the current one, Patriarch Kirill. He, under the Soviet Union, served in the Orthodox Church and had a code name and had his, operations that he was running on collecting information and recruiting people. Alexei was a KGB agent, same thing, the prior patriarch. So, I mean, they've used this church as a means to run operations.
Right.
And it's the same thing. The church works very closely with Rosotrudnichestvo, which is, the overseas stations for Russians abroad. Those are SVR hubs. I mean, and I was saying it forever, and finally, U.S. intelligence, I believe, maybe 6, 7 years ago, finally confirmed that Rosotrudnichestvo, all the cultural, all the language, all of these things are hijacked by Russian intelligence, and this is a way to run their soft power. And with the Orthodox Church, though, it becomes even more dangerous because Russia's been running these operations in Ukraine decades. Via the Orthodox Church, they actually have spies embedded inside the churches. Um, and they've been running these operations, but there's a very dark blend because, for instance, annexation of Crimea, they not only use the Russian Orthodox Church, but they also use Wagner. And, you have this interception between the church and mercenaries and the biker group, the famous, Putin's bikers. You have this intersection. And they've been running operations, I mean, Ukraine, um, Serbia, Austria, wherever there is a Russian Orthodox Church, they run these operations to recruit people, to collect information. In the US, interestingly, all the Orthodox churches are planted near army and military bases. So they have even more capabilities to collect information. And then we have the main one in the city, that frankly, I'd be petrified to even walk near it. And here for you in the US over the past decade, they have been tapping out and reaching out to both the evangelical community as part of their operation, to men and to militias. And you see, particularly in other states, that there's an intersection between US militias and the Orthodox, branch in that town. And now, BBC did an excellent report that this Russian Orthodox Church, it's outside of Russia, which obviously is still the Russian Orthodox Church, even though they say it's connects to, that they are now focusing operations on recruiting these men. And what they are teaching is basically, you know, trying to indoctrinate them that liberalism doesn't work, democracy doesn't work, that, you have to have this set of traditional values, that the woman needs to be, in the house, the man is the head of the household, and whatnot. And just to wrap up with this, the Russian Orthodox Church works very closely. I worked and literally for years on this. Um, in Europe, they create like, uh, they create this thing where you have the Russian Orthodox Church and the think tanks and the far right parties across Europe, and they all intersect. This is how they co-opted a lot of politicians and former defense ministers and intelligence officials. And there they, I mean, do things from, for instance, there was a think tank um, run in France. I'll give you just one example. There was a think tank run in France by this guy Thierry Mariani, dialogue of no Franco-Russi dialogue. He was partnered with Yakunian, who actually served as a KGB agent in the United States in the 80s in this UN mission. He was partnered with him. They were clearly connected through the Russian Orthodox Church. Now, Thierry Mariani was a politician, a French politician, and he was one of the first people, this is how he came on my radar, to go to Crimea to legitimize those fake elections under gunpoint in whenever that 2014. And then he used his power as a politician to try to disrupt sanctions and do everything to sabotage sanctions and any kind of, punishment coming out of the French government for Russia's illegal annexation. I mean, this is just a small part of this operation, how the Russian Orthodox Church worked with this think tank center and to recruit politicians, and then to use the power that they have in order to try to obstruct any thing against Russia. And at the same time, the think tank would push, anti-liberal New World Order nonsense. So this just shows you how closely intertwined they are. And another key
This
component,
think
just to
tank center.
finish up with this, is Konstantin Malofeyev. He is like the Orthodox king. He is the one who supported and funded Le Pen. He is the one who supports the AfD, and every single far right party in uh, um, Europe and US, even though he's sanctioned. And he, even had one of his operatives here, an American, who ended up going, organizing an insurrection for the election in Pennsylvania, then went to the insurrection at the Capitol, and then fled back to Russia. So it just shows you how, like, this is a very, very dangerous thing. And unfortunately, this is interestingly the one area that US intelligence has not targeted, because it's so sensitive, because it's a church. And I remember writing about this for SIPA, which is the think tank I'm with. And I remember when I wrote about this, my article, the Google removed my article, and the Russians had it removed, and SIPA put it back, and the article again disappeared. It was fascinating. Finally, that we got the article to stay there, but this just shows you how sensitive this is because they don't want that operation touched. Because so far, this is one of their more successful operations in U.S. Sorry for the very
No, no,
long
no, it's fine.
answer.
I just wanna, there's a quick question here from Paula, who said if the administration leaves, who keeps all our information and surveillance? Elon Musk does. He has it already, and
Yeah,
it's just so you know, um, the administration has nothing to do with this anymore, other than giving him the keys to the kingdom. He has it, and he will have it wherever he stores his servers for the rest of all of our lives. So I don't care if you have the next, Barack Obama coming to power, or whichever Democrat you love.
our
It's
information is,
it's too late. It's too late.
yeah,
I will share the article. Well, we'll share all of these articles. Somebody asked, "Will we
yeah,
share the article again?" We'll share all of these articles. We'll send it out, both of us, to all of you, regardless of which one of us you follow. We'll send it out with a list of all the articles that we talked about. I want to, because we were running out of time. I want to talk about two other things. One is, if you know your history, it just goes to show how absolutely insane the world has become. Germany, which has had a very stringent policy of not deploying any of its military abroad for obvious reasons and historic reasons, has now deployed its first permanent brigade abroad since World War II to bolster NATO defenses. And no coincidence, that brigade was sent to Lithuania. Why? Because they obviously assume that Lithuania is next after Ukraine falls, if it falls. And to stress how much everybody, including the Germans, believe that Stalin, that was a Freudian slip,
it is. Mini Stalin.
That Putin will not stop at Ukraine if he's successful in Ukraine. And so, what's going on there, Olga?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and it's not just if, God forbid, Ukraine falls. They are just as worried if there's a ceasefire,
Yeah.
because if there is a ceasefire that allows Russia to redeploy troops, rebuild, their positions, and then attack a NATO country. And every week, like, we're sounding the alarm that there's a new report, new warnings, new signs that, Russia is preparing an attack on a NATO country. Lithuania is a very, very strategic point. You have which frankly, I don't understand how I'm even saying this since it's been a problem for decades, but you have the Slovakia corridor there. And this is for some reason one of the blind spots of NATO. And then you also have Belarus, which effectively is, a Russian military playground. Um, so it is fascinating to see. And I mean, you have US, basically stepping aside, and now Germany, who is taking the lead, and now, doing what they can to to send military to secure the eastern flank. And the last thing I'll just say about this is that, I mean, besides the warnings coming out, literally, if you watch US TV, you wouldn't know nothing. You know that Trump, made some stupid comment and whatever. But across Europe, literally every country is preparing for a war. They're going into a war mindset. They're going into, transitioning and kind at least part of the economy into defense and defense production. They are mining the borders again, whether it's Finland or Poland. They're mining the borders. They're building bunkers. So I mean, this is something that really, again, it's a failure on U.S. media, um, even when they happen to mention Ukraine, not to explain what is happening. Because if Europe gets dragged into a war, if Russia attacks Europe, I mean, this destabilizes the whole world. And that's that. So that is with the Germany. Will include, like I said, will include everything we discussed, all the articles, into the show notes and email it out to everyone.
Yeah. I want to talk about one last thing before we go, because we've mentioned her case before, and I think it's very important to keep her top of mind for people. Ksenia Petrova is a Russian research scientist who was affiliated with Harvard. And to be clear, the only person on earth that can read a very highly specialized microscope that is part of the research into aging. This is a woman who could be responsible for curing diseases like Alzheimer's, for instance, which, by the way, affected Donald Trump's father and allegedly affected not just his father, but also his uncle and his sister, Marion Trump Barry, who died a little while ago. So, if you're a member of the Trump family, you want this woman to be at Harvard because she could potentially cure Alzheimer's for you, because Alzheimer's and other dementia sometimes is genetic. Um, so instead, she was coming back from vacation in France. A colleague of hers at Harvard asked her to pick up a frog sample, a dead frog sample that they needed for their research, and transport it back to Cambridge with her. She was arrested at Logan Airport in Boston upon arrival, detained, and um, when she told them that she could not go back to Russia because if she goes back to Russia, she will be immediately arrested for protesting the Ukraine war, they sent her to Louisiana and they detained her, and she has been in detention since February for nothing. For nothing. She was here legally. She had a student of not even a student visa. I think she was here on a research
Work
visa,
visa.
a
Hmm.
work visa. Um, I don't think that if you are a Venezuelan hairdresser, you should have fewer rights than a deeply educated Russian Harvard affiliated research scientist. So I don't mean to uplift her case at the expense of other people who are potentially not um, as educated as she is or have the affiliations with universities that she does. But I do want to talk about her because this is a show about Russia. If she's deported back to Russia, she will end up in the gulag or worse. And what happened this week is that a judge ordered her to be released. A federal judge, said that she would grant bail to her, to Ksenia Petrova, in her immigration case. She's now going to be transferred back to Massachusetts to stand trial, I suppose, on criminal charges for bringing in this frog sample, which again is absurd because typically the way this works is if you don't declare something at customs, you get a slap on the wrist or at best a 50 or $500 fine. You do not get arrested. Um, it's a kind of a circular thing because if she is arrested, if she's released on criminal charges on bail, she could be redetained on immigration charges. The government claims they're not going to do that, but she is deeply at risk for being sent back to Russia. It is not clear to me why. She could be sent anywhere else, literally any other country in the world. She would be safer than she would be in Russia. They have no problem sending people to countries from which they don't come when they don't want to. For instance, these Venezuelans that I'm talking about are cooling their heels in a gulag in El Salvador at the moment. They have sent Vietnamese migrants to Libya and to South Sudan, which is nowhere near Vietnam, and are hellholes in and of themselves, which I've written about before. But with her, they're insisting on sending her back to Russia and not to France, which is where she came from when she was arrested, which she said she would be very happy to go back to. And I'm sure the French could probably provide asylum for her. And I'm sure she'd be working at a French research institution like that, which would benefit the French and would be a detriment to us. But Olga, this woman is living in a uh, some sort of Kafka-esque hellhole. On the one hand, she is, I guess, safe in Louisiana, even though she's detained and described her detention as she's in prison. They can call it whatever they want. She's in prison. On the other hand, if she is released and deported, she will be deported back to a hellhole in initially to Moscow and then very quickly further east or south or north to a gulag. So, what do you think?
If I were her, once now she's released on bail, I'd ask my lawyer, can I sleep on your couch? Can I be attached to you 24/7? Like literally. This is what I think. Look, we've seen these cases like across the country. We've seen judges say, this Alien Enemies Act is illegal, and frankly, all the actions that this regime is taking are illegal. In this case, we are seeing the judges push back. And, as much as this is good news. I mean, at least the judge did intervene. Frankly, the judge was very harsh and said that the regime's actions were unlawful of what they did with her. Um, and so, I mean, it is positive that she is getting released. And it's good that at least for now, the judicial system is holding. So that's my thoughts. Hopefully her case gets resolved, as many others. I mean, I saw, put in my tracker a 20-year-old, or maybe younger, high school
19,
student in
19. Yeah.
19 in, New York City. Hey Cole got taken out. He did nothing wrong. Went to court to check in. He's here on asylum, and the minute he walked out, ICE grabbed him. So I mean, we really, need to keep highlighting these cases, and that's it.
Well,
Before we do wrap
yeah.
up,
Let me just say this. What ICE is now doing is when people are abiding by the law and showing up to
yep,
check in with immigration as they have to by law if they want to stay here as asylum seekers, ICE is grabbing them.
yep,
So if you are an undocumented immigrant, you probably shouldn't follow the law and just burrow even further underground because if you do follow the law, you will be
you'll be
arrested.
picked up.
You'll be picked up and sent to God knows where. CCOT, El Salvador, um,
Libya.
Libya, South Sudan, Russia. Who knows? Nowhere good. So, for a country that an administration that talks about law and order all the time, they're doing everything possible to make people break the law. And when they do, then that will be their predicate for saying, well, they didn't check in. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. It is a Kafka. I keep using the word Kafka-esque because it is. It is a Kafka-esque hellhole where these people don't know what they did wrong because they're doing everything that they were told to do, and yet they're still being detained. So, on this very depressing note, what did you want to say?
Someone asked if protesting is safe, and as long as there are numbers, protests are always safe. I mean, you have the worst, regimes right now in Georgia, and other countries, and protests are working. I mean, you know, so as long as you have large numbers. But what I wanted to end on is Ukraine. I just wanted to give a very, very quick update. First, please keep Ukraine in your thoughts because what is happening there since Trump started injected himself in this hell is that he's basically given a green light to Russia to kill Ukrainians and even more Ukrainians. I mean, they've been doing it, but frankly, the amount of attacks and the type of attacks have increased to such significant levels we haven't seen it even across the country, just maybe in towns. But what's happening the past few days is just a horror. Second of all, do not believe this media, do not pay attention to this media because they're throwing the spectacle. Trump, and I said it, Trump, made a statement, Putin is crazy wonderful. Now he gave him another 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks is 2 more weeks. We're gonna do this. In these 2 weeks, Russia is stalling because they're preparing a summer offensive. They're lining troops up right now on the Kharkiv border, and frankly, they are preparing. I mean, they have no intention of ending their genocidal war. And Trump is providing cover for them. So when the media sits there and you see headlines that Trump is suddenly coming to some kind of enlightenment, this is all bullshit. Ignore it. There's no
Let
actions.
yeah, let me
Hmm.
just say something. There was an incident yesterday where he was asked about his nickname Taco Trump, which everybody should call him from
Thank
now
you,
on.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah, because it was specifically about tariffs, but taco stands for Trump always chickens out, and that's what Wall Street is calling him now because he always
Hmm.
chickens out on tariffs. He's also Taco Trump when it comes to Putin. So every time he talks about standing up to him or this is it, this is your last chance, he always chickens out. Now, we know why he chickens out on tariffs because the markets go down and Wall Street goes down and it's a disaster and the bond vigilantes come for him and inflation comes for him. So that makes sense as to why he always chickens out. It is less clear as to why he chickens out all the time with Putin, but nevertheless, he is Taco Trump when it comes to Putin also. And it's not just Taco Tuesday, every day is Taco Trump Day.
Yep. Just don't believe anything because
Yeah.
this is very complicated. And I think, how we started the show about Russia's bloody imperialist conquest and the fact that they think, that Ukraine and all other countries held, under Soviet occupation are their territory legally. I mean, this is the mindset that we are dealing with. So everything else, what Trump is doing, what Putin says, what this one says, all of this is noise. Nothing is being resolved. And the only way, frankly, as I've been saying, and nothing's changed from my assessment from 2022, is to give Ukraine all the weapons to defeat Russia. Because the only way to end this in a just way is if Russia is defeated in Ukraine, and that's it. I mean, that's the only way. Any kind of ceasefires and appeasement and anything, this will only further escalate and end up with a whole European war and possibly a global war. I mean, it's always been like this, and the signs continue showing this is what is happening with all the intelligence assessments and everything. The only way is Russia needs to be defeated, go home like, dogs and lick their wounds and settle with their leader, possibly take Putin out, and deal with that because any other kind of agreement, there is no agreement. This is a sovereign country, and Russia for over 10 years has been committing the worst atrocities. And after the phone call between Putin and Trump last week, I mean, over 1,000 drones. I'm old enough to remember when Iran sent a few hundred to Israel, and you had five countries intercepting it, and they didn't even have missiles or drones. Barely reach, whereas Ukraine is dealing literally. They had dozens of drones. I mean, over 1,000 drones, dozens of missiles hit, no defensive. They're fighting North Korean troops. They're fighting, with weapons coming from Iran, from China, from North Korea, from Russia, Russian military. I mean, they're literally fighting everything on their own there, and trying to maintain this. And, now with no weapons coming from the US out of a dozen or so, missiles that ballistic missiles Russia sent, they all got through. There's no air defense. So,
Yeah. Well, on that note, yes, you're right.
yes, the
Pu-
optic
pu-
drones, I mean, the drones we should do a whole show about because
yeah.
Russia's new drones are frightening.
On that note, I invite you again for people who weren't here in the beginning to join me at 3 o'clock today for a Substack Live with Ken Harbaugh. Some of you might know him from the Midas Touch Network. He runs the Valor Network. Olga, Olga and I have been on his show many times. He is a great guy. He's a former
Yes.
Navy pilot, I believe, but a military guy. He and a bunch of other very strong national security people are in Ukraine right now. And so he's going to give me an update from the ground in Ukraine as to what's happening there right now and his conversations with Ukrainians and his conversations just with elected officials and other people of consequence in Kiev. So that's at 3 o'clock today Eastern on Substack Live, just in a few hours. Hopefully you can join me. And then, of course, look out for our post on Substack about today's show and all the documentation of everything we've talked about because we always document everything. We don't make the stuff up. But there's more reading for you to do if you're interested in reading it. Check out my Elon Musk column on Substack today. Check out Olga's excellent, incredible Trump tyranny tracker every day, including today, because all the information you need on all of this stuff she provides for us every day, which is, I don't know when you get sleep, but you do.
I don't.
And you don't? Well, you don't. You do provide the stuff. I know you don't get sleep because you and I sometimes chat at 2 o'clock in the morning over text. And neither of us gets much sleep because we really are very
No.
compulsive. And for everybody else, we will see you next Thursday at 11 a.m. We are again going to do another town hall for our paid subscribers the week of the 15th. We would love for you to join us. If you are not a paid subscriber, please consider subscribing to either or both of our Substacks so that you can be part of that community. For everybody else, thank you so much for joining yesterday, and we will see you again on that town hall in a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, have a wonderful rest of the week. Have a great weekend. Hopefully, if you're in the Northeast, the weather will clear up at some point in our
I
lifetime. I'm not
know.
sure where. But thank you
It
all for
feels like
joining.
October. I'm not complaining.
Yeah.
I don't like
Well,
90-degree weather, so
Well,
this is
I'm the
actually good weather
I'm the
for me.
opposite. I'm all about sun. So, on that note, see you soon, and thank you all for joining. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.